All right, so we are finally at our last lesson, Peace at Last. This is the conclusion of the Civil War. Of course, we left off with Gettysburg the last time, and Gettysburg was a huge blow to the Confederacy. They just could not keep up with the Union. They were losing whatever factories they had to make weapons or uniforms. It just the soldiers just had nothing to work with, and there were just too few of them to be going around fighting everywhere. So the South is in ruins as we go into 1864, and there are two major battles, two major areas that I'd like to talk about. First one is Atlanta. In Atlanta, Georgia, and we can see it here, Atlanta, Georgia. And when we look at the other map, we can see all these battles here leading up to and through Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta, Georgia was one of the more important cities in the Confederacy. Had a lot of railroad hubs, factories, places where they can make supplies. And so by losing Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, um, it would it, that and Richmond were the two places that really need to be taken in order for this war to be over. So the Union pushes through, the Confederate troops retreat from Atlanta, and then William Sherman, who is the commander of the Union forces, goes into Atlanta and takes it over, and Atlanta is virtually destroyed. There is some accounts that the Confederates um, did a scorched earth. Maybe the Union burned it as they went through. Probably a little of both, as the Confederacy did not want to leave any supplies for the Union, and the Union did not want this city to be used um, as a base again against the Union. So I'm sure it went both ways. Um, but then Sherman does something really unheard of. And basically what he does is he cuts his supplies from Georgia, from Atlanta, right over here, and he decides to make a march to the sea. Okay, so he's going to march all the way through enemy territory without supplies, and he's just going to destroy and take supplies wherever he can find it, and and he cuts a swath in the South that they never forget. What Sherman does to them. He goes through and basically his philosophy is war is cruelty. The crueler it is, the sooner it'll be over. So he feels that, the more vicious you are in warfare, the more destructive you are, the other side's gonna be like, all right, that's enough. You know, um, so that is what General Sherman does. In the meantime, Gettysburg it becomes a cemetery for that battle, and so Abraham Lincoln is asked to make a speech there. And when he gets there, uh, he makes a speech that is very, very short. And the people there thought it was one of the worst speeches ever, but history has remembered it as one of the greatest speeches ever. Just goes to show what experts think when they're in the moment. They don't realize the significance of the history that they're witnessing. Um, but he goes on to basically try to talk about what this war was about, and I'm just going to read it. Fourscore and 7 years ago, our our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any other nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. Then he ends by saying, from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And this is the line that everybody remembers: of the people, by the people, and for the people. This was a nation that was made by the people. Okay, it's made for the people. It's of us. So this is what people really do remember: 4 score and 7 years ago, and then of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that is the Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln. All right. So while this is all going on, as the war continues, um, the Union decides to use African Americans as soldiers. The Confederacy uses them as laborers. They worked in the camp. They did regular tasks. They dig trenches or whatever. But the Union actually had African American soldiers who fought, and they fought very well. 54th Massachusetts, they turned a movie into them, movie Glory, great one. Go watch it. Um, and so they took on a much larger role than what they did in the Confederacy. Honestly, the Confederacy they didn't like the idea. They didn't want African Americans fighting. First of all, I mean, they were slaves. What would they do if you put a weapon in their hand? They might turn around and shoot at you. So they were very wary of putting African Americans as soldiers. So the Union got even more manpower. They had so many more men than the Confederacy, and then on top of that, uh, they were able to use the African Americans to add to their ranks and made things much easier on the Union forces to defeat the Confederacy. Um, Let's see. So they were not paid as well as the white soldiers. They were not treated as well as the white soldiers. They risked atrocities at the hands of the Confederacy. I mean, if the Confederates captured these soldiers, they were not going to treat them um, better than the white soldiers. In fact, they would send them back into slavery, or they would, um, you know, not give them quarter when black suit soldiers surrendered. They might just go ahead and kill them anyway, or put them back into slavery. So you can imagine if you're an African American soldier and you know this, you know that the Confederacy is going to do bad things to you. You're not going to be treated as a soldier. You're going to be treated either as a slave or they're just going to not accept your surrender and continue to go on and kill you. Then you're not going to surrender. You're going to fight very, very hard, and that's why a lot of these troops, not just because they're African American, um, but they fight very, very well because they know that if they lose a lot more than any other soldier. So they fight very hard during this war. And on top of that, the fact that they are fighting to free people of their race from bondage is another massive motivator. So you can just imagine these were top troops when it came down to it in the Union victory in the Civil War. All right, so one of these people, let's just talk about Robert Smalls here. He may come up on your test. Robert Smalls is he steals a Confederate ship. He gets famous for it. He's a pilot for a Union uh, Navy ship, and for a time was a captain. So he was a heroic man and was elected to the United States House of Representatives. When the war is over and African Americans are allowed to serve in Congress, they're given full rights, as you'll see in US 2. He's one of the people that actually goes to the Congress and represents his area. All right, so let's get to Richmond. This is the other city. General Grant he figured out a way to beat Lee, just kept attacking, 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 wearing down Lee, pinning down his forces, and finally he forced his way into Richmond in April 3rd, um, 1865. Same thing happened pretty much, not as bad as Atlanta, but they destroyed supplies and things got pretty badly beaten up in Richmond. Um, and then the federal troops walked in. And this was pretty much the end. Once you lose Atlanta and Richmond, the Confederacy is crippled beyond repair. Lee fights on for a while, but then finally realizes there's just no way that the Confederacy can win. So on April 9th, which is just a few days after Richmond, Robert E. Lee decides to surrender his army to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. So remember this right here. Appomattox Courthouse is where Lee surrenders. Technically, it's not the end of the war, but it pretty much is. Once Lee is gone and he starts saying, look, everybody needs to just accept defeat here. It's over. Let's get back to work to reunite the country and and be the best Americans that we can. And that helps a great deal. So that when Lee starts calling on people to surrender and just give up, there's a better chance. I mean, it could have gone on much longer and been much more bloody and just even more horrible than Reconstruction actually went. Things could have been much worse if people like Robert E. Lee did not have the class to say, okay, it's over now. We lost. Let's move on. Okay. So yeah, so essentially the fighting is over. There's a little bit more fighting, but once Lee surrenders, it's done. So healing a nation's wounds. Lincoln summed it up best with malice towards none, charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in to bind the nation's wounds. So we survived the Civil War. It is over, and the Union holds together. And as we'll see in US 2 coming up next year, it's not quite roses afterwards. We go through quite a bit of growing pains and a lot of lessons to be learned. Just want to thank you for hanging in here and watching all these videos. And I hope you got something out of it. At the very least, just be able to keep up with the class when you weren't able to attend and during this unusual time that we're going in. So thank you for watching and see you at US 2.